How's it going on, everyone? Welcome back to Evo Chronicles with another video. Today's video is about the evolution and history of Spider-Man in video games. So make sure you like this video, subscribe and activate notifications so you never miss out on any future videos. Now with that out of the way, let us begin the video. So when it comes to video game releases, Spider-Man had his fair shares of ups and downs. The web-swinging superhero has appeared in a variety of platformers, beat-em-ups, action-adventure, and open-world games over the years. So we're going over each game in order of release. But to keep things simple, we'll only take a look at games that really stuck around. It all started in 1984. A vertical scrolling action game for Atari and Magnavox systems marked Spider-Man's first appearance in video gaming, and it also was one of the first superhero games. Spider-Man was released in 1982, and it gave players direct control of Spidey for the first time. The goal of the game is to fire webs, defuse bombs, and evade attackers while climbing up the side of a building. You were challenged by the Green Goblin after you reached the top, and you had to evade him long enough to defuse a super bomb. If you succeed, the game would mercilessly reward you with identical levels with the same objective. Spider-Man's aesthetics were considered stunning at the time despite its repetitive gameplay. The Amazing Spider-Man 1990. Spider-Man fans got another side-scrolling platformer in 1990, this time with the hero attempting to save his wife, Mary Jane. To cut a long tale short, Mysterio kidnapped her and now Spider-Man must find him through a succession of movie-themed levels inspired by Mysterio's love for movies. The animations were awful, the controls even worse, and the gameplay was very lacking. The Amazing Spider-Man was first released for the Amiga, although it was later ported to other platforms. The Amazing Spider-Man is a handheld game launched on the Game Boy in 1990. That is not to be confused with the Amiga game. The plot remained the same, with Peter Parker rescuing his kidnapped wife Mary Jane, but the game was constructed differently. Throughout the story, players would face off against Scorpion, Dr. Octopus, Venom, and other villains in addition to Mysterio. The Amazing Spider-Man is remembered for its excellent controls at the time, visually stunning graphics, and it would go on to inspire two Game Boy sequels. The Amazing Spider-Man vs. the Kingpin, 1991. The Amazing Spider-Man vs. the Kingpin, which debuted on the Master System and Sega Genesis, was yet another side-scrolling action game in which Spidey attempted to save Mary Jane from the clutches of a supervillain, this time Venom. To add to the intrigue, the hero is also burdened with clearing his identity after being falsely accused of stealing a nuclear bomb by Kingpin. So in addition to saving his wife, he must find various keys that will allow him to disable the bomb within 24 hours. Spider-Man vs. the Kingpin was transferred to a number of different platforms, each with its own set of gameplay components, stages, bosses, and even endings. It did well enough to persuade Marvel to renew their licensing again with Sega. The Amazing Spider-Man 2, 1992. Spidey is once again framed for a crime, this time bank robbery. In The Amazing Spider-Man 2, a direct sequel to the Game Boy game released in 1990, the hero must complete a succession of stages and kill several bosses in order to clear his identity. Along the journey, the player gathered various things that would aid in resolving the riddles in each level. Overall, the game didn't do as well as its predecessors, and its control mechanisms, difficulty spikes, and absence of in-game saves were all heavily criticized. Spider-Man Return of the Sinister Six, 1992. Spider-Man Return of the Sinister Six released in 1992 for the NES. The game required players to complete a series of stages, each with its own boss. It was published near the conclusion of the NES lifecycle, therefore it didn't receive much attention or acclaim. Spider-Man and Venom, Maximum Carnage, 1994. Maximum Carnage closely resembles the events of the Carnage arc in the comic books at the time. Some of the game's cutscenes are even digital copies of actual comic book parts. Players would play with Spider-Man and Venom in order to fight Carnage and his gang of supervillains. In terms of gameplay, it was reminiscent of the Double Dragon beat-em-up series, with players collecting power-ups that unlocked other Marvel heroes to assist in fights. Spider-Man The Animated Series, 1995. This game was released in 1995 and was based on popular Spider-Man animated series with an art style inspired by it. There were 6 separate side-scrolling levels in the game. as well as a startling number of boss confrontation, over 20 in total. Players could only control Spider-Man. However, the Fantastic Four made an appearance in the game's story. This game was released on the SNES and the Sega Genesis. Spider-Man Web of Fire, 1996. Web of Fire is notable for being the only Spider-Man game to emerge on the Sega's 32X system, as well as the console's final release in North America. It's another side-scrolling action platformer with 6 separate stages and boss fights at the end. While Hydra and the New Enforcers were the main opponents, Web of Fire featured a slew of new enemies not seen in previous Spider-Man games. Despite its limited popularity, the game has developed a cult following over time. Spider-Man 2000. Spider-Man took a break from video games for a few years, before returning on the PlayStation and Nintendo 64. Spider-Man took advantage of modern 3D technology to provide the most immersive web-crawling experience to date. Well, that was when it was released back then in 2000. For the first time, gamers may freely swing around in 3D landscapes, utilizing spider webs. However, hardware constraints remained, resulting in an ever-present fog all over the Earth. The game was praised for its story and voice cast, including Spider-Man's creator Stan Lee acting as a narrator. Spider-Man 2: The Sinister Six 2001. The Sinister Six is a direct sequel to the Game Boy Color version of Spider-Man from 2000, in which the web-slinger battles the infamous Sinister Six once more, before meeting Dr. Octopus and saving Aunt May. Players must explore 6 different levels, each concluding with a boss encounter. The gameplay was similar to earlier handheld Spider-Man games, but with the addition of the ability to climb along the side of buildings. There was also a strange unlockable minigame in this game, in which Spidey and Dr. Octopus collaborated to save teddy bears from a burning skyscraper. Spider-Man Mysterio's Menace. Spider-Man made his first appearance on the Game Boy Advance in Mysterio's Menace, another side-scrolling beat-em-up games with an extra level compared to previous releases. In terms of portable Spider-Man games, it's quite normal, with the player exploring 2D levels that end in boss confrontations. Mysterio's Menace offered weapons and suit upgrades that would alter gameplay, such as the symbiote suit's ability to refill health. It was received well overall, with most of the praise directed towards its vibrant graphics and fluid animations. Spider-Man the Movie 2002. Spider-Man the Movie was a 3D action game released to coincide with the debut of a live-action film. It roughly replicated the plot of the movie, with some added enemy types and story hooks. Indoor and outdoor stages were included in the game, as well as the ability to swing around the city's rooftops. Unlike previous movie tie-ins, Spider-Man did remarkably well in the box office and garnered largely positive reviews from critics. The game featured a variety of secret unlockables, various costumes, and playable characters. Spider-Man 2 2004. After a few more years, Spider-Man returned to the video game scene in another Spider-Man 2 movie tie-in. The game featured a far more fully realistic New York City, which could be freely explored in an open-world environment. Players might go on side missions, find hidden secrets, or simply swing around at their leisure, in addition to following the events of the film. Spider-Man 2 was ported to almost every piece of relevant hardware at the time, but performance varied dependent on the machine. The Ultimate Spider-Man 2005. Ultimate Spider-Man is another open-world game with a really cool graphic style. Based on the same named comic book, players could choose between playing as Spider-Man or Venom, each with its unique set of skills, while they complete story missions across Manhattan. Side quests and racing challenges against Shocker and the Human Torch were also included in the game. It was highly received across all platforms, and thanks to its more cartoony aesthetics, it has aged surprisingly well. Spider-Man Friend or Foe 2007. Friend or Foe took Spider-Man's universe in some interesting directions. For one, many of the game's villains would become allies after Spider-Man defeated them. Ultimately, the game sought to marry the stylized look of the Ultimate Comics with the beat-em-up gameplay of older Spider-Man games. The end result was an over-the-top 3D action game that was ported to pretty much every home console available at the time. Critics took aim at the game's juvenile story, clumsy control, and poor graphics. Spider-Man Web of Shadow 2008. Web of Shadow avoided the Spider-Man films in favor of crafting a new story about Venom and the extraterrestrial symbiote that has taken over all of New York. Spider-Man is entrusted with saving the city while also battling other villains. At one point, players would encounter X-Men's Wolverine, who accused Spider-Man of being a villain himself. Reviews were mixed, with complaints targeted at the game's overall lack of polish and rough controls. Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions. Shattered Dimensions closely follows the story of the tablet of order and chaos which gets destroyed, resulting in a ripple effect across multiple dimensions. This brings together 4 different versions of Spider-Man from alternate universes. Amazing Spider-Man, Noir Spider-Man, Spider-Man 2099, and Ultimate Spider-Man are each made playable characters with distinct playstyles and abilities. Shattered Dimensions was widely praised, and it is still regarded as the best entry to date by many fans. Edge of Time 2011. Beanox attempted to repeat the popularity of Shattered Dimensions, however, their efforts were not as successful the second time around. Edge of Tomorrow is another original narrative about 2 versions of Spider-Man, The Amazing Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2099, who team up to close a rift in time. It included a one-of-a-kind cause-and-effect game mechanic that allowed one Spider-Man to influence the other one's world by interacting with the environment. While the story was celebrated, many were critical of the game's general quality and repetitive design. The Amazing Spider-Man 2012. The Amazing Spider-Man is a 3D open-world game based on the 2012 film of the same name. It is modeled after prior entries. Spider-Man battles villains such as Rhino, Lizard, and Scorpion in this narrative, set months after the events of the film. It was generally positively reviewed, with the game's ridiculously low difficulty receiving most of the criticism. The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Amazing Spider-Man 2 was inspired by the film of the same name. Similar to 2012's Amazing Spider-Man, Peter Parker, now 2 years into his web-crawling career, resumes his search for his Uncle Ben's killer. This game didn't do as well as the other one, and it ended up being Beanox's final Spider-Man game. Marvel's Spider-Man 2018. Marvel's Spider-Man is a terrific modern take on the Spider-Man's mythos that finds the perfect balance between recognizing Spider-Man's appearance in the comic books, video games, and film. The game maintains the open-world style gameplay of its predecessors, but it features a much more experienced Peter Parker juggling his personal life and his passion for web-slinging. It was a financial and critical success, earning the title of the best superhero game of all time in some circles. While the game lacks considerable creativity and repeats many of the previous game's cliches, it featured the absolutely best web-slinging mechanic of any Spider-Man game at the time. Now moving on to the last game of the franchise, Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales. This game is a follow-up to Insomniac's game that shifts focus from Peter Parker to his young apprentice Miles Morales. With Peter missing in action, Miles is forced to step up and fulfill his web-slinging duties to keep New York City safe. This sequel keeps the open-world design of the first while providing a unique story about Miles learning to control his abilities and adjusting to his new duties. Miles Morales is the first Spider-Man game to be released alongside a new console, and as we know, it was released alongside the PlayStation 5. This game is probably the best Spider-Man game of all time, at least in my opinion. It's a very unique take on the Spider-Man's franchise, and it is also a great way to advance the story of Spider-Man overall. So which one of these games did you play before? Tell me down in the comments down below. And if you like this video, then make sure to leave a big thumbs up, subscribe to Evo Chronicles, and also activate notifications so you never miss out on any future uploads. With that said, we'll see you next time with another video.